Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Katie Muirhead, and I'm a regional lead with the Ontario Caregiver Organization. I'm joining you today to provide you with an introduction to self-advocacy and to explain some of the basics or things to consider when you're advocating for yourself or a loved one. So today I'm hoping you're going to walk away with a better understanding of what advocacy is, how to build a strategy, and touch a little bit on the importance of documentation, communication skills, and share a couple of resources with you that hopefully helps you in your advocacy efforts. So let's get started. What is advocacy? Essentially, in the big picture, advocacy means actively supporting a cause and trying to get others to support it too. So speaking up, drawing attention to an important issue, with the goal of directing the people that make decisions to a solution that works for you or a group of people. So there are different types of advocacy. Today, we are focusing on the first two types, the self-advocacy or individual advocacy and peer advocacy. So essentially what I mean by that is when you are advocating to represent the interests of yourself or someone else. But there are other kinds of advocacy. So there is systemic advocacy. And what I mean by that is when you are advocating to influence social or political systems to try to bring about change for larger groups. So an example of that is several years ago, there were some auto insurance legislation changes that were coming through. And we saw a number of groups, nonprofits, for-profits, people with lived experience coming together to try to advocate for the best interests of people with an acquired brain injury and the caregivers that support them. So that's a really great example of systemic advocacy. There's also legal advocacy. So this is when we may see this with motor vehicle collisions, or if there was a medical malpractice suit, an assault, or some sort of legal implication. And in these cases, we strongly encourage people to advocate with the use of an expert, like an attorney, a lawyer, somebody with legal expertise to protect your legal rights. So just to be clear, at the Ontario Caregiver Organization, we do not participate in any advocacy efforts. We acknowledge, however, that caregivers are often finding themselves in a position where they need to advocate for themselves or someone else. And so as an organization that provides education, awareness, and support for caregivers, we thought it would be helpful to give a few tips and tricks when you're advocating for yourself or your loved one. So the first thing to think about is our bigger strategy. So when we're trying to be effective as an advocate, we want to think about these four things: breaking down the problem, educating yourself, identifying your rights, and developing a solution and thinking about how you're going to present that information. And I'm going to go into these a little bit more in detail. So the first one is breaking down the problem. A lot of times as caregivers, especially if we're new to caregiving, everything is coming at us all at once. Things can start to feel really overwhelming, and a problem can become a mountain or feel very heavy and overwhelming. And so the first thing that we encourage people to do is break the problem down into smaller, more manageable pieces. The reason we suggest this is that you can then look at those more manageable pieces and think about what's a priority right now and what can we maybe put on the shelf for later. And so that really helps us focus in on what we need to deal with right now. And we can maybe have a little bit more lightness around some of these other areas so it doesn't become too overwhelming. And then the next step is educating yourself. So this could be for many, the most important or the biggest step when we're thinking about building a case or advocating for ourselves or someone else. And there's a few things to think about when we're collecting information and educating ourselves about that problem that we're trying to address. So first, we want to look at identifying the facts. What do we know? What is the circumstance that we're dealing with, and making sure we're clear on what we're trying to address or what the problem is that we're trying to advocate for change on. And then we want to look at collecting information. So this could be medical information, it could be employment related information, it could be any type of information that helps you educate yourself and inform yourself about the problem and possible next steps you could take. And usually when we do this, when we figure out our facts and we learn more about where we're going and what we're doing, we find some gaps, we find some holes in our facts or information. And so we need to look at what additional details do we need to collect. So that could be policies and procedures, it could be better understanding the legal implications, the rules. So for example, if we take a caregiver situation, maybe you have a partner who sustained a brain injury and you've gone from 2 incomes to 1 income. And you've decided that caregiving and working and trying to find a balance between that is a priority for you. And this is, you need to work with your employer on how to maintain your employment while trying to take care of your loved one. So we look at the facts, we understand what the needs are of our loved one, what the needs are of ourselves. We collect information about what's available to us in our employment situation. And maybe we've never done this before. Maybe we've worked for this company for decades and we've been a model employee and we've always attended work and never had any issues before. And so we don't know what's available through our human resources department. We don't know if there are leaves of absences that we can take or switching shifts or things like that. So that gives you kind of an example of what I mean by figuring out the details and seeing where there might be gaps. And then we want to better understand who makes those decisions. So again, using that example of balancing caregiving and work, maybe, you know, we've only dealt with our peers or our colleagues throughout our time at our place of employment. Maybe we work at a really big company and we don't often interact with human resources or our unions if you're in a unionized environment, or the people that make those decisions. So it's really important to understand who makes those decisions, so that helps you minimize how often you're telling your story and explaining things, and you know you're going to the right people when you're ready. And then the last thing that I always encourage caregivers to think about is, are there other people that can help you? Sometimes we try to take everything on our own. We are not experts in this. Most of us don't enter our caregiving experience as an advocate, having experience doing this kind of thing. And so we need to think about, are there people that can help? Maybe that person at Human Resources can provide more information about the policies and procedures at your place of work. Maybe you are in a unionized environment and you have a union representative that can support you in collecting information. So always thinking about, are there other people that can maybe help and assist and take some of that educate yourself weight off of your shoulders. Next, we want to think about identifying our rights. So sometimes the term rights can be a bit confusing, and there's a few different things to consider. So there are laws, contracts, rules, and policies. This is what makes up our society. You know, when we talk about laws, we think about legal implications, police involvement, lawyers, going to court, things along those lines. Contracts are things that we sign or we get involved with on a fairly regular basis. We sign a contract to do our banking, to get internet service, to buy a car. And then there's rules and policies in place at, for example, our place of employment, where there's policies and procedures and things to follow. And then there are preferences and social expectations. And I mention this because it's really important to understand the difference between what you hope for or what you expect to get versus what you are contractually, legally, or procedurally obligated to receive. And it's really important to think about those things when we're trying to come up with a solution to our problem, because sometimes when we're feeling really overwhelmed or upset about something, or there's a lot on our plate at once, we start down the path of asking for what we expect from our social interactions versus what we are entitled to through the rights, through legal contract or policies. So it's really important to think about the difference between those two things. And when we're advocating, we really want to focus on what we are entitled to through those different rights versus what our preferences or social expectations might be. And then we want to think about developing our solution and how we're going to present that. So we always would encourage you to come to the table or the conversation when you're advocating with some solutions to present. So we've just broken down the problem. We have collected all of the information. We are starting to really understand what our rights are and what we're entitled to. And now we want to come and bring some solutions to the table. So when we do that, we want to communicate those facts and share what you've learned, share the information to make sure you're clear and they understand that you understand what you're entitled to, and bring some solutions to the table. So using that earlier example of a caregiver trying to balance caregiving and work, in that situation, maybe they needed some more flexibility in their schedule because they needed to take their loved one to appointments. They needed to have access to their cell phone because there were people calling to schedule things, treatment teams, specialists. Your person with a brain injury is calling, asking what you're doing, where you are, maybe needing some extra support in the home or the environment that they're in. And so thinking about that as an example, we can then say when we're presenting this to our employer, this is what I need from you. I'm looking for a more flexible work schedule. I'm working for the option to have access to my phone and maybe a quiet space to take a phone call during the day. And this is what I understand I'm entitled to as an employee of this company. What can we do to work together in order to make this happen? And so thinking about all this, sometimes we build a really strong case for what we're advocating for. And we think we're going in with really great solutions and they're just going to say yes, and it's all going to go really well. But sometimes there can be barriers to those solutions that you're presenting. So kind of preparing yourself and thinking about what those barriers might be and if there's alternatives to that you can offer. And also thinking about the implications or the expectations from the person you're advocating to. So of course, using that workplace example, there may be some implications for your employer in changing schedules around. There may be extra work involved. And we would love to hope that they're willing to do that for you in a short period of time. To cover off what you need until you're ready to come back in a more regular sort of way. But just always keeping that tucked in the back of your mind when you're developing and presenting those solutions to the people you're advocating to. So I would be remiss in not mentioning documentation whenever we're advocating for someone or something. So in the brain injury world, documentation is critical. Both the correspondence and conversations that we have with the medical documentations, the assessments that are done. And especially when we're advocating for ourselves or for someone else, having this documentation organized with the right details is going to really help you in the long run. So things that we recommend around documentation would be keeping those notes, those correspondence notes of the conversations had, and ensuring that we've got details like times and when we're talking to these people, who are these people? What do they do and who do they work for? And of course, the details of the conversation. In the olden days, a lot of this was done over the phone. Now we start to see a bit more happening electronically through email, which really does support you as a caregiver in organizing this information. But it's still important to think about it, especially if you're new to the caregiving space, and get a system in place and organized right from the beginning, because that will really help you down the line. And when it comes to medical documentation, assessments, reports that come from specialists, what I often recommend to people is to also keep those somewhere safe and organized. And I often suggest having them separate. So maybe you'll have a medical binder or folder or place where that's kept, and a correspondence binder or folder, a place where that's kept. And the reason that I suggest that is more often than not, you're going to be pulling those medical documents and assessments to access a lot of services in the brain injury community. you need proof of injury, you need to share some of these details. And it's going to be a lot more efficient and helpful to you to have that organized and sorted out. Communication skills are really important when you're advocating, and we could spend a whole hour-long conversation just talking about communication skills. But a few quick tips and things to think about when we're communicating is understanding what our communication style is. So we are not all born to advocate. Some of us are very shy and nervous and uncomfortable in having these more difficult conversations. Some of us are feeling so overwhelmed and frustrated and upset with their situation that it can be easy to be overly emotional and get agitated or angry or upset. And so understanding what communication style works best for you, and that also includes how you communicate. So is that through email correspondence? Is it face-to-face? Is it over the phone? We all have different ways that we communicate and different strengths in those areas. Thinking about the tone of our voice, the volume of our voice, the body language that we have also is very helpful when you're advocating for someone. Sometimes what we want more than anything is to go in, guns blazing, kick down the door and demand for, the things that we want. But what we know is that's not always the most effective way of getting our needs met. So thinking about all of these things as we're building our case and how we're presenting our information is going to be really valuable and important to you. And one of the things that I recommend to folks is practicing. So especially if this is not what you do every day, which is the case for most caregivers, practice how you want to communicate this information, how you want to have these conversations. What's your message? Again, who should be receiving this message? We hear a lot from caregivers that they're telling their stories over and over again, and that can be so frustrating. And so thinking about who am I telling this to and why am I sharing it with this particular person? Are they the decision makers? How can your message be presented? So again, is that through email? Is it through a phone call? Is it a face-to-face meeting? Is it virtual in the world that we're living in right now? And so thinking about all of those things, including things like what can help you feel more comfortable? Do you need somebody there with you? It's really difficult to have new conversations with new specialists or with your employer or other people that maybe you've never had before. Think about what you're saying, understand what they're saying, and write it down all at the same time. So sometimes for some people, they want support there to help them with the documentation, as an example. So thinking about what would help you feel more comfortable. And always, how can I take care of myself in the middle of a conflict? It's okay to ask for a break. It's okay to step away. It's okay to say, I just need a few minutes. I'm feeling like I'm getting upset, or I'm not happy with how this conversation is going, and I want to be, I want to calm down, or whatever it is that you need to say or do, or I need to use the washroom. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to take care of yourself. It's important that you do. So when you're practicing these messages, you can do that through the mirror. If you want to talk to yourself, you can do that with a trusted friend or a family member, or sometimes there are service providers or agencies you're involved with that can maybe work through some of these problems with you and give you some support or constructive feedback about ways that you can continue to improve your message to whomever you're advocating for. So that gives you a really high level overview of some tips and tricks and things to consider when you're building a case, how to build your case, and things to consider when you're advocating for yourself or for someone else. And I wanted to share a few resources that you might find helpful. And the first one of those resources is, of course, your local, your provincial or national brain injury associations. They exist across the country, and they are a wealth of wonderful resources, support, education, and information. So I'm always encouraging people to go back to their brain injury associations, get connected, and see what kinds of supports they can offer you as a caregiver. I also often encourage caregivers to explore informal circles of care. And what I mean by that are friends, family members, community members, people that aren't part of your treatment team or that aren't like paid employees to come and provide treatments or services to your loved one, but people that can come and help with the other things. So they may not be able to advocate on your behalf or advocate on your loved one's behalf, but they may be able to lighten the load in other areas so that you can focus on what you need to focus on as a caregiver. They might be able to come and cut the grass, bring a meal, spend some time with your loved one, organize your documentation for you, clean the house, do a load of laundry, take your car for an oil change, whatever that is. So I'm always encouraging caregivers to think about other people that might be able to step in, help out, and take some weight off your shoulders. And then, of course, as the Ontario Caregiver Organization's main focus is caregivers, our only focus is caregivers and improving the lives of caregivers through education and awareness and support. We have some great resources that are available for all of you as well. So I gave some examples around caregiving and the workplace today, and we do have a toolkit for caregivers in the workplace that I would encourage folks to check out. We also have toolkits for employers, so they can learn how to better work with caregivers in their spaces. We've got a lot of different education opportunities, including e-learning modules, covering Caregiver 101, which is for people who are new to the caregiving space, caregivers partnering with healthcare professionals, and we've also got some other e-learning modules available for caregivers on other topics. And then, of course, we have support options. We have our peer support options, our one-to-one peer support program, our online support groups. We've got a helpline that's available 24/7 that caregivers in Ontario can call to ask questions and get information about what's in their local communities, and so much more. So I want to thank you all for joining me today and spending a little time learning a bit more about individual advocacy. I hope you're walking away with a few more tips and tricks up your sleeve. And for more information, you can visit our website at ontariocaregiver.ca.